Have you ever caught yourself reacting far too strongly to something that, on the surface, seemed completely insignificant? It might be just a tone of voice, a facial expression, or a small habit. Nothing that should matter that much. And yet, inside, it feels like a whole volcano erupts. Someone speaks with too much confidence, and you suddenly feel anger, as if their confidence diminishes you. Someone shows up late to a meeting, and the irritation rises so intensely that it feels like a personal insult. Someone shares their achievements with enthusiasm, and a wave of contempt appears inside. Of course, bragging again. What's striking is that these situations repeat themselves over and over. And if we take a closer look, we can see that it is often not the actions themselves that sting us most, but the echo they awaken within us. A touched inner string vibrates too loudly because it is tied not only to the here and now, but also to something deeper, something that has lived inside us for a long time. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us in others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This thought is not an excuse for others' mistakes, nor is it a call to tolerate what is unacceptable. It is an invitation to look into the place where the true reason for our reaction resides, and to finally face what we usually prefer to hide, even from ourselves. In today's video, we will explore what psychological projection really means in simple words, why it is so closely linked to Jung's archetype of the shadow, what signs indicate that a trigger points back to us rather than just to the situation, and most importantly, what we can actually do to reclaim this hidden power as our own. What is projection in simple terms? Projection is one of the most subtle and, at the same time, one of the most familiar defense mechanisms of our psyche. Whenever there are qualities, desires, or feelings within us that we either don't know how to face or simply don't dare to acknowledge, our mind seems to push them outward, shifting onto other people what in fact belongs to us. As a result, we start perceiving in others the very traits we refuse to recognize in ourselves, and we react to them with unexpected intensity. Imagine someone who finds it difficult to admit their own anger, because from early childhood, they absorbed the message, being angry is bad, you'll be punished or rejected for it. In such a case, their psyche will choose a detour. Instead of recognizing the anger inside, they will spot aggression everywhere. In a taxi driver who speaks too harshly, in a colleague who insists on their point of view, in a partner who simply allows themselves to be direct. Or take another example. A person avoids acknowledging their envy because to them envy feels shameful and unworthy. And so, instead of admitting, yes, I also want to have such achievements, they declare that everyone who openly speaks of their success is arrogant, self-absorbed, or vain. It is important to understand. Recognizing the mechanism of projection does not mean saying that everyone else is perfect and the problem is always only in me. Not at all. People really can behave in toxic, unfair, or aggressive ways. But if our reaction to a situation turns out to be excessive, disproportionate, and refuses to let us go for a long time, this is almost always a sign that an internal trigger has been activated, and that the present moment event merely brushed against an old wound. And here lies the paradox of projection. It both protects us from difficult experiences and, at the same time, prevents us from seeing the true source of our pain within ourselves. The shadow. According to Jung, what we repress ends up controlling us. Carl Jung used the word shadow to describe that part of the personality which has been pushed out of the field of consciousness. It is an entire inner world of impulses, desires, and traits that at some point were denied a place in the respectable picture we built of ourselves. Within the shadow live both uncomfortable, even frightening aspects: anger, greed, envy, hunger for power, vindictiveness, rage. and at the same time, powerful resources without which we can never feel whole. Strength, sexuality, courage, creative boldness, the ability to say no, and stand up for ourselves. The shadow, once repressed, does not disappear, nor does it simply dissolve into nothingness. Instead, it finds alternative ways to express itself. And one of the main ways it breaks through is through projection. A person may be convinced that they are peaceful and tolerant, yet their shadow will then begin to show them a world full of rude, aggressive people. Someone else may believe they are modest and unambitious, yet their shadow will multiply those around them who seem obsessed with status, recognition, or power. In this way, the world itself becomes a mirror. We see in others what remains hidden and unaccepted within ourselves. Jung famously wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." These words remind us that whatever we repress will inevitably find its way back into our lives, though no longer in a direct and honest form, but distorted and often disruptive. To bring the shadow into awareness means to reclaim our freedom of choice. For it is precisely there, in that dark, often intimidating corner of our psyche, that our greatest resources lie hidden. And it is that very energy, which, once recognized, can transform our lives. How to recognize that it's projection. Sometimes we are absolutely convinced that what we are feeling is directly and entirely connected to a specific situation or to the behavior of another person. Yet if we look more closely, certain markers begin to appear, and they reveal something deeper. What we are experiencing is not only about the present moment, but also about an older layer of experience that is reawakening inside us. The first marker is disproportionate reaction. The situation itself may be tiny, almost insignificant, but the wave of emotion that rises in response feels enormous, as though it belongs to an event of massive importance. Someone says a harmless phrase, and suddenly your chest tightens as if you have just been betrayed. Someone slightly raises their voice, and you feel as though the anger of the entire world has just been unleashed on you. It is like a landslide triggered by a single pebble. The external cause is minimal, yet the inner avalanche it sets off is overwhelming. The second marker is all or nothing thinking. The inner dialogue becomes filled with words like always and never, with sweeping judgments that close off further reflection. Thoughts such as, they are all like this always happens to me, or obviously there's nothing more to discuss, take over. This rigidness shows that the emotion is not arising from the reality of the current moment, but from a much deeper layer of past pain and helplessness. The third marker is recurring triggers. If the same kinds of people or the same types of situations keep provoking the very same emotional response, it is almost always a sign that projection is at work. Maybe authoritarian bosses make your blood boil, maybe overly caring friends suffocate you. Or maybe every time someone publicly celebrates their achievements, you feel a pang of irritation. Even though the people are different, the feeling that erupts inside you is identical every time. And that consistency points straight to an inner source rather than an outer cause. The fourth marker is precise targeting. We are most provoked by those who do exactly what we forbid ourselves to do. Someone confidently says no, and it infuriates us because we cannot bring ourselves to refuse requests. Someone calmly asks for help, and we bristle because we do not grant ourselves that permission. Someone boasts about their successes or unapologetically takes a rest, and we feel a surge of judgment because deep inside there is a strict inner law. That's not allowed for me. This is the shadow at work, holding up a mirror that reflects the qualities we have pushed out of awareness. The fifth marker is shame or emptiness after the outburst. Very often, once the storm of emotion has passed, there is a lingering sense of discomfort, as if we defended ourselves in the wrong place or against the wrong threat. We may feel embarrassment, Why did I snap like that? Or we may feel hollow, as though all the energy drained away while the real issue remained untouched. This is the psyche's way of signaling that what just happened was not an adequate response to the present, but the activation of an old defensive mechanism. If you notice several of these signs at once, chances are high that what is happening is not simply a complaint about someone else or an objective evaluation of the situation. It is, instead, material for inner work. And in such moments, the most important thing is not to turn against yourself or slip into self-blame, but to acknowledge honestly, yes, something in me is asking to come into awareness. And through this very trigger, I have been given an opportunity to see what until now has remained in the shadow. Why we begin to project. The roots of projection almost always go back to early childhood, to those years when a child is just beginning to learn how to stay safe and preserve connection with the adults they depend on. It is during this time that we absorb direct and indirect messages that later solidify into inner laws. Perhaps we were told anger is ugly, or good boys and girls don't get mad. And so the natural force of aggression, which should serve to protect our boundaries, turns into something shameful that must be hidden deep inside. We might have been taught, asking is embarrassing, or you need to handle everything on your own. And as a result, the simple human ability to seek help begins to feel like a weakness. Or maybe we constantly heard, standing out is dangerous. Don't get too full of yourself. Thinking about yourself means you're selfish. Each of these messages became a prohibition placed upon the most vital and natural parts of our personality. In order not to lose love and approval from the adults we relied on, the child does the only thing that works in such dependent relationships. They push the unacceptable qualities into the shadow. Anger, envy, boldness, the desire to be seen and recognized. All of these are banished to an inner basement. Later, even as we grow up and become outwardly independent, we continue to live with these prohibitions, and the psyche, in its attempt to preserve the illusion of safety, finds a way to manage. It projects the forbidden qualities onto others. Now it is no longer I am angry, but they are also aggressive. Not I want attention, but he brags too much. Not I am afraid of being weak, but she's always whining. This is how the defense works. It isn't in me, it's in them. But here comes an important clarification. Recognizing your own projections does not mean erasing boundaries or tolerating everything that happens. It is not an invitation to close your eyes to abuse or toxic behavior, and it is not a call to submission or helplessness. On the contrary, genuine work with projections always strengthens our boundaries rather than weakens them. We learn to do two things at once: to acknowledge our part in the reaction, why did this affect me so strongly? And at the same time to state our boundaries clearly. I do not agree to be treated this way. Conscious work with projections allows us to draw increasingly precise distinctions. Here is what belongs to me, and it requires my attention. Here is what truly belongs to the other, and in this case I have every right to protect myself. This clarity is what creates inner stability. It liberates us from being dependent on the behavior of others and gives us the ability to act as adults, honestly, firmly, and without turning against ourselves. In daily life, these projections often reveal themselves in situations like these. At work, we often come across situations where projections are triggered almost instantly. Imagine a colleague who confidently talks about her achievements, emphasizes her contribution to a project, and does not hesitate to praise herself during meetings. Suddenly, a spark of irritation flares up inside you. Of course, here she goes again, promoting herself, unable to simply do her job without putting herself in the spotlight. But if you pause and take an honest look, you may notice that the anger comes not only from her behavior, but also from the fact that you too want to be more visible. You want your work to be recognized, yet you are afraid to openly claim that space. and so her boldness becomes a mirror reflecting your own unexpressed strength. In relationships, the dynamic often shows up even more vividly. Imagine your partner saying, "Tonight I need some time for myself. Please don't call me." Instead of calmly accepting this, a wave of hurt arises. He's selfish. He only thinks about himself. But if you look deeper, you may realize that what's really behind this reaction is your own difficulty in acknowledging your needs. You too feel tired. You too sometimes need time alone. But you've gotten used to sacrificing that for the sake of others and waiting for your wishes to be guessed without you saying them. That is why your partner's right to claim space for himself stings so much. It reminds you of the very thing you forbid yourself. Friendships reveal this mechanism all the time. Suppose your friend, for the 100th time, tells you how hard everything is, complaining about work, relationships, or her health. At some point you snap. How much longer is she going to whine? She doesn't think about anyone else. But if you are brutally honest with yourself, another question arises. Am I allowing myself to feel exhausted and vulnerable? Or have I trained myself to keep a straight face, to always be the strong one who copes no matter what? And so I feel anger at someone else's right to be open about her struggles. This is the paradox of projection. The very qualities we deny ourselves are often the ones we condemn most harshly in others. Even in everyday situations, the pattern can be seen. For example, you are stuck in traffic and someone cuts you off. Instead of simply reacting and moving on, you stew for half an hour. They're all rude, selfish, and have no respect for the rules. But if you are completely honest, haven't you ever wanted to cut corners when you were running late? You just didn't allow yourself to do it, while the other driver did. And now you are furious, because in him you recognize something you so carefully suppress in yourself. Each of these scenarios illustrates the same point. Other people's actions can take many different forms. But if your reaction inside is too strong, disproportionate, and repetitive, it is a clear signal that the matter is not only about the other person. It is an invitation to look at yourself and ask, what exactly inside me is resonating so powerfully? Where do I do, or long to do, the same thing, yet forbid myself? Still, not everything should be explained through projections. It is very important to remember that working with projections is meant to be a tool for growth and self-understanding, not a way to complicate your life or to confuse yourself further. A common mistake is to slap the label, "Oh, that's just my projection," onto absolutely everything. Sometimes a situation is simple and concrete. Someone broke an agreement, failed to keep a promise, or acted in a disrespectful way. In such cases, it is not about, "I repressed something and don't want to admit it." It is about real boundaries and the basic rules of interaction that the other person has crossed. If you reduce everything to projections, you risk devaluing your own feelings and ignoring actual facts, which only leads to more confusion rather than clarity. Another trap is what psychologists call spiritual bypassing. This happens when a person says, "Well, that's just my shadow. I need to accept it," and then continues to tolerate situations that are clearly harmful to them. For example, someone repeatedly shows aggression, dismisses your needs, or uses you, and instead of setting boundaries, you keep telling yourself, "The problem is in me. I have to work on myself." But that is not genuine shadow work. That is avoiding responsibility for your own protection. Awareness and honesty are not meant to make you endure everything silently. They are meant to help you see clearly where you end and the other begins. Finally, another dangerous distortion is turning shadow work into a form of self-punishment. Many people, once they learn about projections, start blaming themselves for everything. If I was triggered, it must mean I'm a bad person. There's something deeply wrong with me. But this is absolutely the wrong approach. Our goal is not to punish ourselves or to push ourselves deeper into guilt and shame. On the contrary, The true purpose of working with the shadow is to restore wholeness, to see in ourselves both what we like and what we dislike, and to stop waging an endless inner war against our own qualities. Only then do we become alive, authentic, and whole. Working with projections is a path of gentleness and honesty, not harshness toward yourself. And the more we learn to recognize where it is time to stop and say, "No, this is my boundary," and where it is more useful to ask, "What inside me is reacting so strongly right now?" the deeper and more resilient our connection with ourselves and with the world becomes. In the end, irritation can be seen as a guide back to yourself. Irritation is neither a life sentence nor an excuse. It is a subtle signal that flares up in those very moments when something inside us is asking for attention, recognition, and gentle reflection. It does not spoil us, nor does it demand that we immediately lash out or justify ourselves. Instead, it illuminates a doorway into a part of the psyche we may not have visited for years. The place where memories and feelings once too painful, too shameful, or too forbidden were stored away. If we can treat that spark not as a blaring alarm demanding fight or flight, but as a marker on the path quietly saying, "Stop and look," then a space for choice opens up. Instead of an automatic reaction comes a pause. Instead of blame comes curiosity. Instead of harsh self-criticism comes precision. The ability to separate facts from interpretations, to name needs clearly, and to see reality for what it is. In this sense, reclaiming projections means expanding inner freedom. The more honestly we recognize our own vulnerabilities and hidden prohibitions, the less dependent we become on other people's mannerisms, tones of voice, or moods. The clearer we see what is truly happening between ourselves and another person. And the stronger our boundaries become, not as rigid defenses, but as a clear architecture of connection, where mine ends, where yours begins, what is possible and what is not. Paradoxically, turning inward in this way is not an escape from the world, but a way of becoming steadier within it. Where before there was only an outburst, now there is a clear statement. Where once the mind screamed, "They always," now there is a grounded right now, I feel. Where there used to be the impulse to vanish or attack, there emerges the calm strength to say, "This matters to me," or "Next time, let's." Remember, the shadow is not only a storehouse of forbidden impulses, but also a reservoir of power. It contains energy, courage, vitality, creative boldness, the ability to say no, and the right to say yes. And every time someone triggers us too much, it is actually an opportunity to reclaim one of these resources. Not through denial or inner warfare, but through acknowledgement. Yes, this is in me too. Yes, I can feel this as well. Yes, I want to have the right to this, safely, for myself and for others. Integration does not make us comfortable or polite. It makes us whole. It reduces the inner split between what we experience and what we allow, quiets the constant background noise, and gives us a stronger foundation in the body and in the words that describe reality as it truly is. Awareness always begins with something small, and that small step is more than enough. One gentle pause, 3 long breaths, a single precise word for what you are feeling, one short boundary drawn without sting or threat, and the vector already shifts, changing the trajectory of your relationship with yourself and with the world. Let this process unfold step by step, not in a sudden leap. That is not weakness, but wisdom. Walking slowly, we notice what guides us, what sustains us, and what we genuinely need. Today it might be just one pause and one honest statement. Tomorrow a little more air and clarity. The next day, another centimeter of freedom where before there was only reaction. That is enough to set the process in motion, and enough to keep it going.